at power plants and electric generation related to it. There's a lot of problems in the sector of late, and in the coming 1.5 hours, we'll try to look deeper in the problems and try to find answers to questions that will arise. Unfortunately, our roundtable discussion coincided with the opening of the Energy Forum, and all the dignitaries rushed to inauguration ceremony. Because of that, we will not have with us neither the Ministry of Energy nor other officials. I do hope that our colleagues from Donbass will nevertheless come here. And as we have 1.5 hour scheduled time, I would kindly invite all the members of this discussion to freely express their views and opinions in it, and also to attempt giving your colleagues and other peers the floor. We have an online interpretation and online streaming of this event. So where's the promised mountain of coal? We had similar events around half a year ago, dedicated much to the same topic, and the then Minister Waszewski announced the beginning of work of the anti-crisis agenda to help the country live through the winter. The anti-crisis plan endorsed by the government envisaged accumulation of around 3 million tons of coal at electric power plants, but the exact figure we have today is a bit different from the stated amount, and I would really like to invite representatives of energy generating companies to provide their evaluations of the preparations for the winter heating season and related perspectives. I'd like to give the floor first to the head of Center-Energo, Mr. Oleh Kozemko. Good morning. The matters at stake for this roundtable discussion allow me saying the following thing about our preparations at Center-Energo, the preparations for the upcoming heating season. The ministerial directive number 920 on related preparations is being closely followed and performed by the company. We have 8 generating blocks in repairs. We are finalizing this repairs, and we are about to recommission power generating unit at Volynska power thermal plant. We had to initiate it after the fire, this plant, and we are about to finalize it. Gas and furnace oil generating units are prepared for operation, and 6th and 7th generating units at Volynska thermal power plant are in the process of being started. So we can say that technically the company is prepared for the heating season this winter. As regards coal stock of the company, we made calculations as to the necessary amount that we will require, and we know the declared figures, and we've been circulated relevant directives from the ministry on that. So by December 2015, we still need to buy 2,700,000 tons of these gas group coal will make 1,700,000. And at this moment, given the tempo of purchase, we have about 1,246,000 tons already stocked. I don't see any problems with it. Our key suppliers is the State Coal Enterprise of Ukraine and the State Coal Mining Company. 1,105,000 tons of coal of deficit grades, A and T grades, are distributed between mostly suppliers, those located in the ATO area. They will have to supply 465,000 tons, and there will be more coal coming from external suppliers. 480,000 tons will come from Russian Federation, and 160,000 tons will come from Central African Republic. That way we will provide for the intended stock. The minimum equipment necessary to operate since October, say for Vughlygirska TETs, will comprise 4 generating units, and Zmiivska and Vughlygirska TETs will need at least 2 generating units to come up with a technical minimum output and to avoid any repercussions about sustainability of their operation. Looking at the rate of supply of deficit grades of coal, I've came to an understanding that without diversification of supplies, it will not be possible to provide for normal heating season this winter. And because of that, we launched a number of negotiations with top leading coal trading companies like Vitol, Mercuria, and some others. And last Friday, we sent draft agreement to Mercuria. The agreement, actually a contract to supply 2 king-size coal carriers from Central African Republic. They will start going starting late October, and we expect the signed contract to be returned to our office today, and we will finalize our remaining issues with it. We've also streamlined our processing capacities at Ukrainian ports to provide for prompt transportation of the coal that we are about to receive. And we are doing everything possible to go along the deadlines and to provide for the necessary stockpile amount specified by the Ministry for Energy and Coal Mining Industry of Ukraine. I would also like to add here that as of today, if we check for the stock balance in our company, so the balance currently stands at 399.5 thousand tons. This concerns the aggregate stock for Vughlygirska, Zmiivska, and Tripilska thermal power plants. Speaking of coal in transport, we have 375 half cars, railroad cars, expected for Zmyivska and Tripilska TPPs. That is to say that there is an ongoing stream of coal into our TPPs, and we fully understand that the diversified supply also through Mercurio will provide us with possibilities of uninterrupted coal supply to our two TPPs. In terms of what is the situation on Vuhlegirska TPP, we don't see any major problems with it, and we are ready to unload 200 half railroad cars on a daily basis. It is a bit more than the intended rated capacity, because the rated capacity is about 160, but given the situation, we understand it, and we will do our best to move faster without waiting for the results of coal quality analysis. And we've discussed it already with our suppliers, and we are in constant contact with the Ukrainian railroad company to maintain our position that we are ready to unload 200 cars, coal cars, on a daily basis. Given that we've already accumulated more than 40,000 tons of coal, it already goes in line with stated plans of preparations. The Centrenерго company has always had the coal of Ukraine State Enterprise as its main supplier, and at this moment they only supply us with gas-grade coal, no anthracite, no other types of coal, and this enterprise that has long been working with our maritime ports, and they're quite capable of providing us with anthracite and lean coals, and we strongly call upon them to diversify their supplying capacities. We at our Centrenерgo company have checked for our logistic schemes, and after our August negotiations, we got the information that the first coal carrier will come in November, and we do hope there will be no logistical bottlenecks. Again, I would like to maintain that we've always used railroad transport to transport our coal, and there are some new problems in our relationships with maritime ports today, but these are the problems that are quite manageable, and we think that we will come to normal business. And you know that before that ships would come via Укренерго. It was like that in the past couple of years. Now the company announced a tendering procedure to unload the coal shipped to our maritime ports. We also consider possibilities of expanding the range of our suppliers to the United States of America, to Australia, and other countries. By the way, I'd like to use this possibility to invite to this tender anyone capable of providing these services please welcome. The tender deadline has been transferred to this Sunday. There is still time for those willing. So that's roughly the information I wanted to share with you. I'm ready to take questions. Thank you.
There will be questions. And nevertheless, I suggest that Executive Director of DTEK, Dmitro Saharuk, would describe the situation in the DTEK enterprise. Thank you for this opportunity. I think I should split my description into two major areas. First of all, the supplies of coal, and the second is financial situation. So the coal goes first. In our warehouses, currently we have up to 1,270,000,000 tons. This is the coal which we have in our CHPs. Recently, we have stored around 100,000 tons of coal, including A and G grades. During the last month, we managed to increase the G the amount of G coal in our storages. As for A mark, the major problem is the hostility area and bringing this coal from hostility area. The last month, the biggest problem was the availability of carriages and trains actually to bring the coal here. The locomotives, electric locomotives, are not available in sufficient quantities, and from the moment when the electric structure of the railroad was ruined, we can use only locomotives, old locomotives, and we need a big number of them, and we need to bring 30, 40 tons per day, which is a big capacity for the Donetsk railway. Also, we have the problems with fuels for locomotives, and we have the problems with spare parts for them. And that's why in our storehouses in the hostility area, and Ukraine prohibited to bring coal via railway road during the last few months. But taking into the account that this is Ukraine which requires coal, it's surprising for me why Ukraine cannot resolve the issue with special fuels for the locomotives. Having resolved the problem with fuels, with spare parts for locomotives, and having allowed to transport all this coal from the hostility area to Ukraine, we were able to double the amounts of coal available in our storages here in mainland Ukraine. Without all those measures, without fuel, spare parts, and permit to cross the contact line, we won't be able to to raise the the volumes of coal in our warehouses considerably. And unfortunately, that unflexible position had stimulated creation of transportation railway roads on the occupied territory, and that road which is being now created there, it is now created not as a resident of Ukraine, and there is a risk that they will create a separate rail road. They will buy the diesel fuels and repair locomotives on the based on resources received from abroad, and thus the supplies of coal to Ukraine will fully stop. Another issue, how we can ensure supplies of coal from the ATO area. We should provide the coal supplies with the priority status. We used to do this in 1990s when there was a shortages in locomotives, in fuels, and the coal was given priority in transportation, and this is more important in the view of the winter coming, when you do not transport, when you do not take off the coal from storehouses, it may froze there and will become even more difficult for transportation. By November, we expect to accumulate sufficient volumes of coal in our storehouses, but under condition that the ministry would allow us to remove all those obstacles which I mentioned. It's quite simple to understand why imported coals cannot substitute Ukrainian ones, because there is big financial shortcomings. There are huge non-payments, 1.6 million of debt, of non-payments from generation to the from consumers to generations. That's why we cannot carry out advance payments to our foreign suppliers, and they require either almost 100% advance or bank accreditation, which is actually the same. And this amount of money could be equal to some 250, 240 million hryvnia, and of course we do not have this free money to freeze them on the bank accounts. That's why we are ready to bring those 2 million tons of black coal, which we are ready to bring to mainland Ukraine. You might heard that because of this insufficient supplies, our energy blocks are switched off. Up to 7 energy blocks were stopped, coal blocks were stopped. Even atomic nuclear power plants have to be were not loaded up to full capacity last week. Last week we remained in reserve up to 1.5 gigawatts of generation. And now about financial issues. This is a VAT due to the launching of automatic VAT refund. The new procedure requires that you have to deposit the VAT funds in advance, and then later VAT will be paid to the budget. This was already done in July. This month the situation became more complicated. Dонбасенерго, Центренерго, since they purchase coal from the ATO area, they cannot get VAT invoices from there. That's why they cannot claim this VAT for refund from the national budget, and we do not have any idea how energy market will be able to make the ends meet this month, because they need to put a huge amount of advance payments into this special VAT advance accounts. There are no easy solutions. One of the solutions could be cancelling of electronic VAT administration in energy sphere, because anyway we work in the closed non-cash system. On the other hand, there might be another solution to cancel this advanced VAT for energy companies. So the biggest financial problems are non-payment for consumed energy, Russian import, which is irregular, and the VAT. These are biggest financial problems which today prevent us from buying coal abroad. Although I agree with my colleagues that supplies from ATO area are non-stable, we would like to have a cash security cushion, but we do not see any other way out. We do not think about supplies from Russia, because last year, in November last year, Russian supplies were stopped without any explanation, and the reliability of Russian supplies today raises many questions, and we want to prevent this in future. Thank you very much. Before our experts will assess the situation in general and will respond to the generators representatives, I would like to I would like to speak about figures. Center-Energo mentioned that they are ready to buy imported coal, including the Russian coal. Could you explain us prices for South African coal and Russian coal, and how much they are expensive against Ukrainian one? Of course, we cannot say that imported coal is less expensive than Ukrainian one. It's nonsense. Ukrainian coal costs 1,320 hryvnia plus VAT. The prices negotiated with South Africa are at the level and with all supply conditions are around $65 per ton with production of 550 kilocalories. Russian coal costs $67 and with a productivity of 600 kilocalories. Of course, this demonstrates that the ATO coal is much more cheaper. We tried to test the different combinations, burning a mix of different coals, ATO with imported coal, etc. So we have calculated all possible scenarios, and today the best offer comes from the ATO coal. But if we are so much dependent from the ATO coal, then Southern African coal will be missed for us and will be lost for us, and we should think today about alternative scenarios, and our CHPs cannot be transferred to other fuels immediately, like to hard oil or different fuel mixtures. That's why we are thinking about Southern African coals. We have made, whether you can afford Southern African coals, we have made several calculations, and our calculations shows that we can afford one boat of coal, and we will need to deposit actually 250 million hryvnia to the bank, and having done this, we immediately have to start our projections, financial projections, how to make possible the supplies of second boat. Of course, we can borrow this money, but in this case, we later next year, for example, autumn next year, we need to reflect that borrowing in tariffs for consumers. That's why I say once again, we can afford one boat, but we need two boats, and we need to negotiate immediately two boats. Does it mean that we will start resolving the problems on the way when the problems arrive? Actually, I say that I have to engage immediately 240 million and deposit them in the bank.
My second question to Dmitro Saharuк. The way out of the situation you have suggested, I mean the one on VAT, is it supported by a kind of draft legislation or some address to governmental authorities to sort out the situation as soon as possible? Are there any prospects of it? Yeah, I will respond to it, but then before that, I'd like to speak about the price for coal. If we speak about the one imported from the Central African Republic, given all costs incurred, it will be around 1,950 hryvnias, VAT included, when transported to the power plant. And this will be materially bigger than the alternative Ukrainian prices. Speaking about VAT, yes, there are draft legislations. We had bills prepared and delivered to the Parliament for review and inclusion in the hearing session. There was a draft legislation on zero VAT on coal, the one to eliminate depositing funds to special accounts. Actually, the developers of the bill suggested a number of schemes to resolve the problem, but unfortunately, it was yet to be included in the parliamentary hearing agenda. It has never been discussed yet. The only regulation they adopted last month concerned the elimination of quarterly discrepancies between VAT amounts paid, but that only prolonged the death throes of the sector. And the problem is that we need top legislation on that, not a regulation, and at least some decision needs to be made, if not to resolve the problem, but at least to release some pressure on market participants. But we may think that we will not see prompt response until they're warm and nice in the Parliament House. Yes, you know, in order to save the market, both DTEK and Energo do something on a monthly basis by depositing our funds every month, trying to meet the noon deadline every time. On one hand, it allowed us to fix the market temporarily, but on the other hand, there is a problem of money available given the 1.4 billion deficit already existent on the market. You know, when we calculated the cost of second ship supply, we took into account the amount already accumulated and stocked in warehouses of our TPPs, and say Vuhlegirska TPP needed 227,000 tons, for example, and or if we take furnace oil, we need to have at least somewhere in around of 18.9 thousand ton of furnace oil. It does require funds, and as we have to comply with regulations and directives of the ministry, we need to come to specific stock amounts, and this brings about the situation. There is another side of the coin, is that you accumulate coal as intended, but you're not able to use it to generate electricity, and you have no money for next supply, for next purchase. Okay. Now we have a request from Mihайло Волинець to speak about the topic. Thank you to this event coordinators. And, you know, in order to provide the society and the media representatives with the clear information, we will not be able to do it within 1 hour. It will require at least 3 hours to answer all the questions. We speak about coal now, but we cannot say about such things that water inflow in main rivers like the Dnieper, the Dniester has been reduced 3 to 5 times. And we have no reserve capacity to maneuver. Secondly, we didn't mention that the gas accumulated in our underground storage facilities is 1.5 billion cubic meter less than we had previous year. And this will have its say on the heating season. Next, the Ministry of Energy safely ignored this roundtable discussion as they did it previously as well, when neither the minister nor his deputy would come to provide real objective information. Check how state-owned coal mines operate. There are 35 of them, and they produce mining mass, not coal, but coal with earth. According to statistics, we have 1,720,000 of coal accumulated, but some part of it is of poor quality. Gas-grade coal can reduce its thermal capacity by oxidizing in summer heat. Then we said, okay, let's import coal from Africa for $65 per ton. But for some reason we are shy when we need to compare prices of Ukrainian coal and the imported one. Given the heat-producing capacity of South African coal, we will see that it is not enough for our country, and we will need to also use furnace oil and gas for that purpose. This will bring extra costs that will be paid by residents, by enterprises and companies. This will also take some funds necessary for successful development of the coal mining sector. You remember the time when 240 million hryvnias were deposited with Kyiv Rus Bank, which went bankrupt, to support the industry. Part of the money was to pay salaries and salary backlog of miners. So no money, the bank went bankrupt, the plants go on hold, and there are also thermal generation and cogeneration units that also produce electricity. And we never speak of the amount they need to stock for proper operation. The railway network also requires coal. Residents use coal for private heating. Even in the mining regions of Donbass, the families of miners that have long been used to using coal for individual heating, they're now stripped of their stock. And we need to find ways out of these quandaries. You know that Russia is currently laying down a high-power electric cable across the Kerch Strait. If the winter will be severe, they will cut all sorts of supplies of energy carriers, from furnace oil to gas to electricity. And we will have to kneel before Putin, kowtowing to ask for energy carriers and related imports. I wonder if we have any sound-minded politician or government official to comprehend the complexity of the problem, to understand that this will bring huge social tensions, not just in among miners, who, by the way, have salary backlog of 700 million hryvnias, which is about 2 months' worth of salary. And there are people like on Yuzhno Donbasska mine and others that have not been paid salaries since last year. The governor of Donetsk Oblast said of government holdings to be established. Being a member of the ministerial collegium, I've never known this information. I read it in the media. I am one of the signatories of of a white compact we signed, but I was never informed. And this contributes to complicating the situation. And the miners, I think, will have to go on strike. Check for the latest 3 strikes in Selidov Ugal mines that we had recently. It went just in an unorganized way, and these strikes were headed by some radical elements. Miners do have responsibilities before their families because they work and they expect to be paid to support their families, and this is a whole range of problems that exist today, and we need to discuss these problems, to discuss them in depth. And it does need a very thorough discussion. I barely mentioned the 10th of the issues we have. Unfortunately, I don't have time to voice up them today. Well, unfortunately, the topic of today's meeting is coal-based energy generation. But you see, as a trade union leader, I need to speak about people's conditions, about their salaries. I cannot go beyond around it. And the problem that the energy market does not settle its account with coal-producing enterprises, and this again leads to a situation when coal production dwindles. But at least in some cases we see attempts to establish social dialogues with the mines, and trade unions speak against companies' intention to cut on coal mining sector development, say in Dobropolsk rayon of Donetsk Oblast. And this happens because of backlog in payments, because of reduced tariffs. I don't know why the tariffs available for imports of Russian coal that is done in an emergency case is higher than relevant tariffs for the Ukrainian generation. And Demchishin now says that around 2 million tons of coal has been accumulated. I'd like to see those stockpiles, and I'd like to know the TPPs that have these stockpiles. You know, the situation should be continued with the line ministry and with government representatives, but I think not today, definitely. Not at this roundtable discussion. I think there is a comment from Center-Energo. I do understand what Mr. Volynets says. He says, say of Southern African coal having lower heat generating capacity is not the correct type of coal for our generation units. But you know, the designed coal type is the one that has been identified by individual TPPs and their generation units, and according to existing standards, say P and A grade coals should be used at Vuhlegirske and Tripilska TPPs. That is to say that really the South African coal is a bit of inferior quality, but we've designed our technical schemes, technical maps, to provide for proper burning of that type of coal. And I do support you, Mr. Volynets, when you say about lower prices for the coal. But again, if we check other numbers, 1.5 million ton of production, real production, against 9.5 million tons of scheduled supply. A huge difference. And second question, who can guarantee the coal from the ATO area will be supplied? I don't understand it fits better Ukrainian TPPs, but it was designed already in 1960s or 70s. And because of that, Centrenерго has to design these technological maps to prepare for the burning of South African and other inferior quality coals without additional fire-up assistance for at Zmiyivska TPP, at other TPPs. We train and instruct our personnel, and the heat generating capacity of 5.5 thousand kilocalories is now just enough for us to continue going. And surely we are not going to accept coal that we have exceeding level of ash beyond 18%, that is the threshold. I do understand that you are trying to glue every gap, but I want to say that relevant policy should be developed by the state, and there is a special minister and a special ministry, and they sit in the cabinet, and no one says that about the balance of energy carriers, about the balance of coal grades we need. And we are still not used to speak about the emergency situation we approach, about the dearth of fund and dearth of coal stock. No one mentioned of those bursts of coal that we have in generation units of our TPPs. You know how at times they fiddle with gasoline, mixing different ingredients to come up with a kind of fuel that effectively destroys cars. We see similar things being done in the coal industry when some remains of lowest grade coals are mixed with even with earth, with ash, to come up with an horrible mix that may really flare up inside the generation unit, and it may even bring up casualties. And this will be the problem for professionals working there. It will be you who will be held responsible, first of all, not the minister. So the question is, without preparing our TPPs, they will have no spare capacity to maneuver in peak situations, which is, peak hours in the morning and in the evening. I would still like to give the floor to our experts. Going back to technical preparations, as regards Centrenерgo company, we do comply with the Ministry Directive 920, and I can assure you that we will be prepared. The only problem we have now is that we have nothing to feed these TPPs. We will have our equipment prepared. You see that there are 3 generating units working at Vугільні TPP, and we're about to repair the 4th one and to put it back into operation. Same goes about Zmiyivska and Vугільська TPPs. We do repair our equipment and we do prepare it for the season. We will be technically prepared, but what we need to understand is how to provide coal supply to our TPPs. If we are told today that the coal from the ATO area will come in, we'll gladly receive it, and we'll have more fund from it, and we'll be better able to use it. Because of that, we also do repairs to our thermal generating units at Zmiyivska TPP, for example. We do provide for necessary technical updates and repairs, though the equipment is old. But we do it, and I can show you a document to support my statement. Our Centrenерgo company really needs to be prepared for winter.
We have Vice President of Ukrainian Energy Association, Mr. Олександр Рогозін. I will speak very briefly because my colleagues presented specific energy generating companies. I will provide some additional information. What was done within 6 weeks. On September 1st, there was a decree which has approved the amounts of fuels that should be accumulated in our CHPs as of October 1st, in line with the Ordinance 765. The credit line is established for the energy market, and 750 million already used, and the 1 more billion will be used in September. And currently we witness transportation from the ATO area. Good news is that in August, the majority generating companies stopped to be losing companies because they remained losing from late 2014. But the losses of the first 6 months of 2050 won't be covered. As of October 1st, the list storages of coal were in 2007, 2008, but all the rest winters we had sufficient storages, but the problem is the temperature in winter. Now about transportation from ATO zone. The problem here is that we need this coal for our energy system to survive, and here I even do not take into account the risks. I simply look at the infrastructure. As for repairs, regular repairs, actually in August and September we used all the energy generating blocks which work with coal, and we have planned this the overhaul for them till later period, but this in general may suggest that we will have no time for regular repairs, and the level of possible emergencies might be, the risk of possible emergencies might be higher this year in winter. The majority of CHPs demonstrate bigger bigger risks of emergency. For example, Ladisian CHP never experienced such a situation when all the blocks stay in operation all the time. They cannot be stopped, and they cannot be repaired on regular basis. On the other hand the productivity of generation against the last year is lesser, which again shows that the repairs are carried down and that the emergencies appear more often. The only our hope is on the warm winter, but we still need to do something. That's why I believe that we try to postpone mitigation of all risks and solutions to all the problems till later and later time. But despite the fact that the companies try to do their best and to resolve the situation, but all the experts who work in this sector, they are rather anxious. You have heard the data with the accumulation of fuel. In internet, I read that the cash flows should not be withdrawn, and there was another statement that Energatom will allow us to survive in winter. About withdrawal of cash from turnover and frozen this cash on the accounts. And sometimes we even need to borrow money to put them on deposits. All that currency risks, nobody assessed them, and they are ignored in case of deposits. About fuels in storages, we have some coal in stock, and there are some technologies available. For coal, you have to tighten the pellets, or you can store coals in sectors, and thus accumulating more coal on stock. You nevertheless can ensure its quality on the account of continuous rotation. And by the way, the burning capacity of coal decreases when it is stored for a longer period of time, up to 7%. But at the same time, some types of coal, if you store it in tightened pellets, you can store it for 1 or 2 years even. That is, you can, in this case, you can accumulate big stocks of it and keep them for 2 years almost. 2 years ago, we had 2.5 million tons of coal in our storehouses, and without this huge stocks, we won't be able to pass the previous winter. Due to the professionalism of specialists of the energy companies, we still expect that we will be able to pass the winter. But this is not just a nuclear generation which allows us to balance the energy supplies, and even the green energy, when there is a deficit of coal, the green energy will be able to supply energy to some consumers. In this context, we clearly see that development of the green energy, it's not just a commitment made by Ukraine to the energy community. This is this is an important element. That is, we will be able to survive this winter if the Energatom will be able to produce and to generate energy with more or less stable supplies from ATO, and with some limitations imposed on consumers. But nevertheless, there are a lot of risks. The risk of emergencies on the CHPs, the risk of supplies, etc. And even one more risk: if we manage to survive this winter smoothly, then new management of this energy sector will take preparation to the winter as some easier thing and won't focus their attention on this operation in future.
I will now give the floor to Olексій Чернявський, another yet energy sector expert, to express his vision. And we also have a representative of the Укрзалізниця, the Ukrainian railroad company, because we have questions related to transportation of coal supplies. So coming to the topic of today's meeting, and having heard my colleagues here from ДТЕК and Центренерго, I think that every means counts, and surely the priority way is, and cheaper way would be to bring the coal out from the ATO area. But again, it's necessary to diversify supplies from Central African Republic, from Vietnam, from Australia, from anywhere we can. And from what I know, there is a crisis management headquarters featuring representatives of the ministry, companies, state security service, etc., to judge risks involved in the supplies of coal from a variety of sources. Yes, we have this crisis task force, but the reality is that we don't see whether it's whether there are any changes, real changes, and unfortunately we see that the Energy Forum is of more importance than this topic that we have here today. I would like to give the floor to Iván Hor'якov. Please, Ivan, previous speakers mentioned that your company is providing for coal transportation and that you do everything in your possibilities to arrange for that coal mine supply, coal suppliers. I saw a round table with representatives of Укрзалізниця. It was about a month ago, and I see how much has been done since that time. But there are things that still look worrisome up to this moment, and I'd like you to comment on those fears and expectations that we already heard as to how you are going to provide for coal supply to TPPs. Thank you. First of all, the crisis task force does operate, and exactly they have their next meeting at Укрзалізниця premises. We can criticize them, but without this task force, the situation would be much worse. I did participate myself in some of the meetings, and I do know that after each of them, featuring representatives of people from the Ministry of Infrastructure, those controlling authorities overseeing the situation around the ATO area. I say that we would not have that type of supplies we have from the ATO area the way we have it now in 20 days of September, and we are working according to the plan established by the government. So against the 3,160,000 tons scheduled, we managed to transport effectively 3.5 million tons, and we use all our railroad capacities, Pridniprovska, Lvivska railroads and southwestern railroads. Pridniprovska railroad also worked 10% more than it had to. Donetsk area showed 20% increase. The situation looks a bit less so optimistic with Lviv railroad. They are a bit underperforming, but this has been mostly related to Chervonograd, Vugilya, coal mining companies. Maybe they have their reasons that they're going to explain. We also provide for South African coal supply, but this is not energy type coal. This is the one used by metal enterprises. If compared with figures from the previous years, we'll see that it's about 1.5 times greater the amount that we've transported. Though surely the military action we see in the east of Ukraine have contributed to overall reduction of our transportation capacity, and we may not say that the situation is ideal. Speaking of problems, previous speakers mentioned that railroads is mostly used to transport coal from the ATO area, and we used to see Donetsk railroads network as rather developed and modernized and electrified, but since the beginning of the military conflict, most of it was destroyed intentionally, and some pieces of it in, say, the lines going towards Chaplin, etc., they have never been restored because this is the area nearby the Donetsk airport, and we are not allowed to repair our infrastructure there because of security reasons. We feel compelled to use bypass railroads, again owing to a greatly developed railroad network in that region, but we need to use for that purpose all type steam locomotives and steam engines, and we need to use just one-way routes, which complicates the situation. The throughput capacity of such routes is surely reduced compared to normal two-way routes, and sometimes we can only do it during the daytime, which also reduces our transportation capacities. And again, we have no right to supply either diesel fuel or spare parts to the territory beyond the control of the Ukrainian government, and we try to address some authorities dealing with issuing such permits, but we have never received any reaction from that, and we cannot supply diesel fuel to those territories. Which is to say that we can refuel our engines on the territory controlled by Ukraine, but this allows us for only grabbing coal from the nearest coal stocks. And again, there are problems with spare parts supplies, and this really limits our capacity of bringing coal from the temporarily uncontrolled territory. And the situation is really critical because one more shelling and the line will be broken and we will have to restore it, losing time. And it is really detrimental to our railroad infrastructure. Thank you. Any further comments from our speakers on the topic? If yes, please. Volynets, head of the Independent Coal Miners Trade Union of Ukraine. We always hear here that coal should be imported from outside, from external suppliers, but this requires money. It is about whether the population is able to pay for increased utility tariffs. And then the Ministry of Energy and Coal Mining Industry expects that coal consumption will be reduced because of a slump in the economy. But given the temporary disconnections that will surely happen to reduce the consumption capacity, this will lead to enterprises being stalled at some point, because this will really make them stop their production even of those goods that are really necessary on a daily basis. A question to the railroad company. We at Centrenерго, and as Dmitro already said, we would like to see optimizing ways of coal supply to TPPs. In order to pass the upcoming heating season, we need to be sure that we will be the priority customer for the railroad company Ukrzaliznytsia. If we want to get our coal train from Sintyanovka to Shepetilovka via Rudakovo, we have a problem, say, that we have no free cars to load the coal. And we would really ask you, as the railroad company, to put us as priority customer for the supply of cars, rolling stock necessary for coal transportation, because it is of paramount importance today. Thank you. I think the head of the crisis task force has heard you. I think we can now take questions from the audience, from the media. Just don't forget to name yourself.
Vitaly Knyazhensky, День newspaper. I have a question to the representative of Railway Road. Ukraine has introduced sanctions against Russia, including railway connections. How this will influence the supplies of coal? Because Russia already warned us that there will be problems with locomotives and carriages. The sanctions are against two companies, the first cargo company in Russia and the first cargo company in Ukraine, which is a Russian resident. Of course, they have big numbers of wagons, up to 500 wagons. Of course, it's much, but it's not crucial for Russia. If Russia would not introduce counter sanctions, then this won't influence Ukrainian situation. May I comment about sanctions? There are two things. we drastically need wagons for transportation of coal. We cannot use other wagons except of special. That's why we now we drastically need the sufficient now of wagons, because now the turnover of them had slowed down considerably. While in the past there was 1 week, then now this is 2 weeks. And now when we have 200,000 tons of coal which is transported, and we cannot bring more unless those wagons are unloaded. Now the railroad tried to control the wagons which transport metallurgical products, and the deficit of 5,000 wagons which will be returned back to Russia. From tomorrow, all the transporters of coal will immediately feel this problem, because the profitability of transportation in metallurgy is much higher than in coal. All the representatives of logistics companies went to Moscow to bring 5,000 wagons to Ukraine for transportation of coal, and on this very day we have received the sanctions and they cannot now bring that wagons. Oh, please don't forget to represent. Cannot hear him. No input to the microphone. Cannot hear the question. The mic is off. I'll answer your questions one by one. The crossing of the contact line should be done in line with a special procedure, and there are 3 checkpoints now which allow to cross the contact line. They are, in general, we have 4 of them, but one is ruined. Raдаково, Красный Лиман, etc. They are one rail crossings, and this allows, the capacity is to allowed up to 22 trains per day. Why it is so slow? First of all, there is a special check in Skatovata, Yasenovata from 6 to 21, from 8 to 8, from 8 a.m. till 8 p.m. That is, the trains cannot cross this contact line at night. Can I correct? Nikitovka-Mayorsk. There is 2 rails passage, but the capacity is much bigger. Yasenovata, Skatovata, again 2 rails, but only 1 rail is electrified. Sintianovka-Shipylovka, the capacity is 8 pair of trains because there is no enough locomotives. That is, speaking about capacities, the capacity, physical capacity is not limited, but we do not have sufficient locomotives. We can double today the amounts of transported coal. And minor repairs could resolve the problem considerably. In Avdiivka, Yasinovatova, there is more than 55 minor damages of the road, and you can restore transportation within 3 weeks. But even if you repair everything on the road, the locomotives are not in sufficient numbers. We have repaired Nikitovka-Mayorska passage, but we can use it for 50% of its capacity in general. There are only locomotives. So when I say that yesterday 21 train has passed, no, you said correctly, and while I say that if we manage to double the number of locomotives and trains, the capacity will be even 42. Why not? My question to the representative of railroad. You mentioned that we approach to the competent bodies to enlarge the supplies of spare parts. And what was the reply from that bodies when this might happen? What is the time frame? And my next question to Mr. Kozemko. You mentioned that you expect to have some logistics problems with South African supplies, South African coal supplies to the plants. The contract provides that if we have any problems with logistics, then Ukrainian subcontractor will resolve this problem. Okay, and you mentioned that you will need to raise tariffs. How the tariff might be increased? We say that there won't be huge amounts of that, huge volumes of that coal. 160 in November, 160 tons in December, and but the tariffs from Zmyivska CHP might be around 1 hryvnia 32. For which period? For November, December, and further. But for the company in general, the average tariff will be 92 kopecks. If everything is okay, we can produce any simulation, any model. We can make simulation without Zmyivska test or without Vughlehirska CHP. You ask the question which requires a very clear answer, but I am unable to answer it very accurately. we can develop various scenarios. The average for the average tariff for the company, the tariff for ZMIiska CHPs. We currently make calculations, and the tariff will be raised by the amount of service in the credit. But we speak about very close figures, and my question to Укрзалізниця, to Railway Station.
You asked for permits regarding diesel fuel supply, how it will develop the situation. The leadership, the management of the anti-terrorist center is the body that issues permits on transfer of any goods across the conflict line. Recently, we filed a letter with the Security and Defense Council to clear the matter, but we haven't got a response. We need to provide diesel fuel to Donetsk Railroad network. Actually, we have just 1 quarter, and our task is to bring in as much fuel as it is possible, because every day counts now. We do have a competent authority, which is a coordination center with the anti-terrorist center. There are people competent enough to make competent decisions, whether in military, economic, fiscal area. And at times we see no political will with all relevant authority in place. And I can tell you that the railroad company addressed relevant authorities, and companies have addressed the topic numerously without any success. We are now providing our own diesel fuel to railroad agents. That is, we pay twice for our coal supply, paying for the coal and for the fuel it takes to transport it. I see the lack of political decision, political will. We were told to address the Security and Defense Council. This is what we actually did. The last message we sent them was the day before yesterday, but no response from them. And this requires just a simple managerial decision, because they fear that the diesel fuel might supply would be used to fuel tanks or other military equipment of terrorists. But okay, each engine consumes specific amount of fuel, and there is a system to monitor where does the engine go, or whether it is loaded with train or it goes on its own. So it's very easy. Just provide as much fuel as is necessary for the engine to go to specific unloading area, loading and loading area. And you can also use GPS tracking to see where it is, and you can easily calculate how much fuel it used. But the situation is truly paradoxical, with fuels and lubricants group being among the products banned, up to the furnace oil we use to facilitate combustion at TPPs. We have four furnace oil holding units that are been waiting for 2 months in Konstantinovka, and we are not able to bring in this necessary fuel to a TPP because the coordination center with the anti-terrorist center lacks political will to allow this. So we said them that we are ready even to videotape the transfer of these furnace oil containers to the TPP to show how it will be used, etc. But I think It might be necessary to delegate relevant authority to make relevant decisions to bodies like this coordination center. Otherwise, we are going to be permanently stuck. Наталя Прудка, главком. It was said about utility tariffs being increased, and the Ukrainian National Assembly displayed information recently about the level of payments on the energy market, and it showed that the energy market received 4 billion hryvnias less than the amounts initially paid by individual consumers to their oblast level distribution companies. Is it to say that the money was simply stolen by oblast distribution companies? And we are then told that the energy generating sector is heavily indebted and has no free money, and that people need to pay more. They announced tariff increase by 1.32 has been done because of the situation at TPPs. There is certain equipment that is power plants operate, and we try to look into a variety of technological models, trying to see variants when we will have to use solely South African coal or Ukrainian coal from the ATO area or Russian coal or mixed of any of these, and say we took, because of that. But what about payments for energy carriers? Because the energy market says they do not receive money that people paid. I have no statements on individual consumers, but if we check the energy market information, we'll see that there is no huge gap between money paid and money paid to the market. There are some delays with payments going through between individual suppliers, generating companies, distribution companies. The Market Council yesterday made the decision to write a letter to the Prime Minister in an attempt to solve the matter. Actually, it is a bunch of related issues, because we need to adhere also fiscal matters and problems with tax invoices to coal suppliers, etc. But anyway, in 8 months, the generation sector received 92.8% of money due. And this is unprecedented indeed. And they also took 1 billion hryvnias more of advance payments. And if we check even energy supplying companies and their level of payments, we'll see that in 8 months it was in the range of 93%. Surely we have some backlogs with money being reserved on VAT deposit accounts, and we need to remember about the loan taken last year to settle accounts with energy generating sector. But I can assure you that in spite of those procrastinations with money transfers, the payment discipline is very high, and there is no huge problem with money. Surely with the increased utility tariffs, we might expect reduced rates of payment. That is, we can say that there is no huge threatening gaps in financial flows. I saw that information, but I could not find the source of that information to check it. That way I would have my personal opinion, qualified opinion, but in absence of it. Unfortunately, our time is up and we need to end our event. I'd like to thank all the participants for this public live attempt to dig into the roots of the problem and to find solutions. And I do hope that many of those who've heard us or seen us will have better understanding of the situation than before our event.